Melania Trump's knees buckled and she collapsed in tears right there in the private chapel at Mar-a-Lago, her composed face crumbling as Jonathan Roumie's gentle voice finished sharing the message he claimed Jesus had personally given him for her. The exclusive gathering of 20 influential Christian leaders fell into stunned silence as the former First Lady sobbed openly, her dignity dissolving into raw vulnerability. Nobody expected this moment that would shatter everything they knew about Melania Trump. The tears came in waves as Jonathan knelt beside her, his own eyes filling with compassion. Dr. Rebecca Foster, a Christian psychiatrist attending the gathering, quickly assessed the situation. "Her vitals are strong," she announced softly. "This appears to be an intense spiritual response rather than any medical crisis." Melania nodded weakly through her tears, still unable to speak, completely undone by whatever Jonathan had just revealed. But Melania slowly raised her hand, shaking her head with determination despite the streaming tears. "No, please," she whispered, her voice breaking as Jonathan helped her stand. "I need everyone to hear what he just told me. What Jesus said through Jonathan is the answer to prayers I've been crying out to God about for years." Her legs trembled, but her resolve grew stronger with each word. The gathering leaned forward, sensing they were about to witness something that would change not just Melania's life, but potentially impact Christian influence in America's highest circles forever. The message Jonathan delivered was so specific and prophetically accurate about her deepest spiritual struggles that it shattered every wall she had built around her heart. But what exactly had Jesus told Jonathan about Melania that could cause such a dramatic collapse? And how had these two unlikely figures even come to know each other? The answer would reveal a secret friendship hidden from the media, as God orchestrated a divine appointment that would reshape both their destinies. Stay tuned because what Jesus revealed will shock you to your core and show how God uses the most unexpected partnerships for his greatest purposes. Watch until the end and subscribe because this story gets more incredible with every revelation. To understand how this earth-shattering moment came to pass, we need to go back to when these two unlikely figures first crossed paths at the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. 6 months earlier. Jonathan had been invited to speak about his portrayal of Jesus in The Chosen, while Melania attended quietly in the back corner, desperately seeking answers to questions that had been tormenting her soul for months. Neither knew how God was orchestrating their meeting that would change everything. That morning in Washington, Jonathan had felt an unusual stirring in his spirit during his hotel room prayer time before the breakfast. He'd been kneeling, asking God for wisdom about his speaking engagement, when he sensed a clear message about someone in the audience who would need profound encouragement. The message was so specific and personal that it initially made Jonathan uncomfortable, wondering if he was imagining divine revelation. The impression he received was about a woman living in a gilded cage, surrounded by luxury but starving spiritually, desperately searching for her true purpose beyond the political spotlight. At the prayer breakfast, Melania had arrived early and chosen a seat in the far corner, hoping to avoid media attention and curious stares. She'd been wrestling with devastating questions about her faith and future, particularly regarding her role after leaving the White House. The weight of years in the public eye had left her feeling spiritually empty despite her material blessings, questioning whether God could still use someone who felt so disconnected from authentic Christian community. Behind her carefully maintained public image, she was crying out to God for direction and genuine spiritual connection. When Jonathan took the stage that morning, he shared about the transformative experience of portraying Christ and how it had revolutionized his relationship with Jesus. But as he spoke, his eyes kept drifting to the corner where Melania sat, feeling an overwhelming burden to pray for this elegant woman whose posture conveyed deep spiritual hunger. Something about her presence stirred the same prophetic compassion in his heart that he'd felt during his morning prayer time. After the breakfast, Jonathan felt compelled to approach Melania despite the obvious security challenges and his natural hesitancy around political figures. "Excuse me, Mrs. Trump," he said respectfully, somehow managing to catch her attention as she prepared to leave. "I'm Jonathan Roumie. I just wanted to say that your grace under pressure over the years has been a testimony to many believers, including myself." Melania looked up with surprise, not expecting this genuine encouragement from the actor. "Thank you," she replied quietly, her voice carrying a weariness that only someone walking through spiritual darkness could recognize. And your portrayal of Jesus has brought comfort to millions, including myself during some very difficult nights. They spoke briefly about faith in the public eye, but Jonathan sensed something deeper troubling this remarkable woman. Before they parted, he felt the same spiritual prompting from his morning prayer time. "Mrs. Trump, I don't know if this means anything to you, but during prayer this morning, I felt impressed to tell someone that God sees their hidden tears and has plans for beauty from ashes." Melania's carefully controlled composure cracked slightly as those words struck the deepest wounds of her heart. "Thank you for saying that," she whispered, her voice thick with unexpected emotion. "You have no idea how desperately I needed to hear those exact words today." But what happened next in their secret friendship would reveal just how powerfully God was preparing both of them for a divine appointment that would shake the foundations of political and entertainment worlds alike. You won't believe what spiritual preparation God had been orchestrating behind the scenes. Keep watching because the next revelation will leave you absolutely speechless, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Over the following weeks, something extraordinary began unfolding that would shock even their closest confidants. Melania and Jonathan started meeting secretly for coffee and prayer at undisclosed locations, developing a spiritual friendship that defied every expectation. These weren't casual Hollywood connections or political networking. These were deep, soul-searching conversations about faith, purpose, and God's calling that often lasted for hours in complete privacy away from cameras and critics. During one particularly powerful meeting at a quiet estate in Virginia, Melania opened her heart about her deepest fears in a way she never had with anyone. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life," she confessed, her usual composure cracking. "I have everything the world says should make me happy, but I feel spiritually bankrupt. How can God use someone who feels so empty inside?" Jonathan listened with the same compassion he brought to portraying Jesus, recognizing the cry of a soul desperate for authentic divine purpose. "Melania, that emptiness you're feeling isn't disqualification, it's preparation," Jonathan replied with gentle intensity. "God often empties us of everything we're depending on so he can fill us with his purposes. Look at Esther. She was taken from everything familiar and placed in a position she never asked for, but God used her to save his people." These conversations began planting seeds of hope in Melania's wounded spirit, as she realized God might have plans for her life beyond anything she had imagined. But what neither of them knew was that God was preparing something unprecedented. Jonathan began experiencing vivid dreams and spiritual impressions during his prayer times about Melania's future calling. Night after night, he would wake with specific words of encouragement and prophetic insights about her destiny that seemed to come directly from the throne room of God. The burden became so intense that he started writing these revelations down, sensing their eternal significance even though he didn't fully understand their context. Meanwhile, Melania had been crying out to God in the privacy of her prayer closet, begging him for direction about her post-political life. She felt trapped between her public image and her private spiritual hunger, desperately wanting to serve God authentically but feeling unworthy and unprepared. Night after night, she would kneel in her private chapel, pleading with God to show her his heart and his plans for her future. The spiritual preparation intensified when Jonathan received what he described as the clearest word from God he'd ever experienced. During a 3-hour prayer session, he felt the Lord impressing upon him specific details about Melania's calling that were so intimate and accurate they could only come from divine revelation. The message was about healing, restoration, and a ministry that would reach the most powerful women in the world with the gospel of Jesus Christ. That same week, Melania had been fasting and praying about whether to step completely away from public life or embrace a new kind of platform for God's kingdom. She felt standing at a crossroads between safety and surrender, knowing that whatever God was calling her to would require unprecedented vulnerability and courage. Little did she know that her faithful friend Jonathan was about to become the vessel through which God would answer every prayer she'd been crying out in secret. What happened next would not only change Melania's destiny forever but would also reveal the most shocking prophetic word that would bring her to her knees. Stay tuned because you're about to witness the most powerful moment of divine revelation ever captured, And make sure you're subscribed because this gets more incredible. Now back in that sacred chapel at Mar-a-Lago, Jonathan steadied himself as Melania wiped away her tears and faced the gathering of influential leaders. What Jonathan just shared with me, she began, her voice trembling with emotion, was the exact confirmation I've been desperately praying for about God's calling on my life. The audience watched with unprecedented attention as this private moment of divine breakthrough unfolded before their eyes. Jonathan took a deep breath, understanding the weight of sharing such an intimate spiritual experience publicly. During my prayer time this morning, he said carefully, I felt the Lord impressing upon me very specific words for Melania. He said, "Daughter, I have seen every tear you've cried in secret, every moment you felt trapped behind a public image that doesn't reflect your heart. But I am calling you out of the shadows and into my marvelous light." The chapel fell silent as these prophetic words hung in the air with supernatural authority. But the message that had caused Melania's collapse was far more specific and shocking than anyone could have imagined. Jonathan continued, his voice carrying the gentle power that had made his portrayal of Jesus so compelling. The Lord told me to tell you that He is releasing you from the gilded cage of political expectations to become a bridge builder for His kingdom. You will minister to the wives of world leaders, to powerful women who are spiritually starving behind their success, and you will show them that true royalty comes from being a daughter of the King of Kings. Melania nodded through fresh tears, her heart pounding as she recognized the divine accuracy of these words. 4 months, I've been having dreams about meeting with women leaders around the world, sharing the gospel in private settings where they could be vulnerable without cameras or judgment, she revealed. But I thought it was just wishful thinking. When Jonathan spoke those exact words, it was like God was confirming that these weren't just dreams, they were divine assignments. The most shocking part of the revelation was still to come. Jonathan's voice grew even more tender as he shared the final piece of God's message. The Lord also said, I will use your background in fashion and beauty to reach women who would never step foot in a traditional church. Your past in modeling will become a testimony of how I transform every experience for my glory. You will host gatherings where the gospel is shared through elegance and grace, reaching the unreachable with my love. This prophetic word about her modeling career being redeemed for God's purposes had hit Melania like a lightning bolt. For years, she had carried shame about her past, wondering if God could truly use someone with her background. But Jonathan's words revealed God's heart to transform everything, even her controversial modeling photos, into a testimony of redemption and grace that would reach women who felt disqualified from God's love. Dr. Rebecca Foster, still monitoring the situation, found herself deeply moved by the spiritual authenticity of what she was witnessing. In 30 years of practicing psychiatry, I've never seen such a profound example of divine healing happening in real time, she whispered to Marcus Wellington. This isn't emotional manipulation or religious performance. This is genuine spiritual breakthrough. The other attendees were equally stunned by the raw honesty and supernatural accuracy of the prophetic revelation. But perhaps the most powerful part of God's message was about timing. Jonathan concluded, the Lord said your season of political involvement was preparation, not punishment. Everything you endured, every criticism you faced with grace, every moment you showed dignity under pressure, it was all training for this moment when you would step into your true calling as an ambassador of His love to the world's most influential women. You're about to discover how this divine revelation immediately transformed not just Melania's life, but began a ripple effect that would reach the highest levels of global power. Keep watching because what happens next will absolutely blow your mind, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible faith breakthroughs. As Melania composed herself, the atmosphere in the chapel had completely transformed from a routine faith gathering into a sacred moment of divine encounter. Marcus Wellington, still processing what he'd witnessed, approached the microphone with unprecedented reverence. Mrs. Trump, if you're comfortable sharing, how do you feel God is calling you to respond to this revelation? The question hung in the air as 20 of America's most influential Christians waited for her answer. Melania stood with newfound strength, her tears replaced by a radiant determination that seemed to emanate from deep within her spirit. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe freely, she said, her voice clear and strong. I've been suffocating under expectations that were never God's design for my life. This message through Jonathan has broken chains I didn't even realize were binding me. Her transformation was so visible that several attendees later described it as watching someone step out of a shadow into brilliant sunlight. Jonathan, still moved by the weight of being God's messenger in such a profound moment, shared his own perspective on the revelation. When God gives you words for someone else, you become responsible for delivering them with love and accuracy, he explained. But I never expected to witness such immediate spiritual breakthrough. What we're seeing here is what happens when someone finally receives permission to become who God created them to be. His words carried the same gentle authority that had made his portrayal of Jesus so powerful. The conversation turned to practical questions about how Melania would step into this new calling. Dr. Foster, drawing from her expertise in human psychology and spiritual counseling, asked, "How do you envision this ministry to powerful women actually functioning? What would these gatherings look like?" Melania's response revealed that God had been preparing her heart with specific details for months. "I see intimate dinner parties and private retreats where women in positions of influence can be vulnerable without fear of judgment or media exposure," Melania explained, her eyes lighting up with vision. These women carry incredible burdens: criticism, loneliness, pressure to be perfect. They need safe spaces to encounter God's love and discover their true identity beyond their public roles. Her voice carried the passion of someone who had personally experienced the isolation of power and fame. Jonathan added his insight about the unique ministry opportunity this represented. Jesus often ministered to people in their homes, at dinner tables, in intimate settings where masks could come off, he observed. What God is calling Melania to do follows this same pattern, reaching hearts through relationship rather than platforms. His understanding of Christ's ministry style brought biblical validation to the vision being unveiled. One of the Christian business leaders in attendance asked about the challenges of maintaining authentic faith while navigating high-level political and social circles. Melania's answer revealed the depth of her spiritual growth. "I've learned that authenticity isn't about perfection, it's about transparency," she said firmly. These women don't need another polished speaker telling them how to fix their lives. They need someone who understands their struggles and can point them to the only source of true peace and purpose. The most powerful moment came when Melania addressed her past directly. "For years, I've carried shame about my modeling career, wondering if those photos disqualified me from serving God," she confessed with remarkable vulnerability. But Jonathan's message showed me that God wastes nothing. "My background in fashion and beauty will help me connect with women who might never listen to a traditional minister. God specializes in redemption stories." Her words brought tears to many eyes as they witnessed authentic grace in action. Marcus Wellington asked Jonathan about his role in this emerging ministry. "I believe God has called me to be a spiritual brother and prayer partner," Jonathan responded humbly. "Not as a leader, but as someone who can offer biblical wisdom and encouragement from my experience portraying Christ." Sometimes God uses unexpected friendships to accomplish his greatest purposes. Their spiritual partnership was clearly ordained by divine design rather than human planning. What happened next would shock the entire Christian world as this divine revelation immediately began producing miraculous fruit that reached the highest levels of global power. Stay tuned because you're about to witness the most incredible ministry launch in modern history, and make sure you subscribe because this supernatural story is far from over. Within just 2 weeks of that life-changing moment at Mar-a-Lago, something unprecedented began happening that would send shockwaves through the highest levels of global power. Melania quietly launched what she called Grace Gatherings, intimate dinner parties for influential women where the gospel was shared through elegant hospitality and authentic vulnerability. The first gathering included the wives of 3 world leaders, 2 Fortune 500 CEOs, and a Hollywood A-list actress, all seeking spiritual answers away from public scrutiny. The transformation was immediate and supernatural. At the very first Grace Gathering, held in a private dining room overlooking the Potomac River, 2 women gave their hearts to Jesus Christ after Melania shared her testimony of redemption and divine calling. "I've attended countless charity galas and political dinners. whispered the wife of a European prime minister, tears streaming down her face. "But I've never experienced the presence of God like this. How do I surrender my life to Jesus?" The intimate setting allowed for genuine spiritual breakthrough that would have been impossible in traditional church environments. Jonathan had become Melania's prayer partner and spiritual advisor, joining these gatherings virtually when possible and providing biblical guidance for the conversations. His expertise in portraying Christ brought unique insights about Jesus' heart for women that resonated powerfully with these influential attendees. Christ always elevated women when the culture diminished them, he would share during their planning sessions. Your ministry is continuing his legacy of honoring and empowering women to find their true identity in him. Word spread discreetly through elite circles about these transformative gatherings, and Melania found herself receiving private requests from some of the world's most powerful women. The wife of a tech billionaire confessed her spiritual emptiness despite unlimited wealth. A Supreme Court justice's spouse shared her struggle with depression behind her perfect public image. A celebrity's wife revealed her desperation for purpose beyond fame and fortune. Each woman found hope and healing through Melania's transparent testimony and gentle presentation of the gospel. The most shocking breakthrough came when Melania received an unexpected invitation to meet privately with 3 wives of world leaders during a diplomatic summit in Switzerland. What was supposed to be a social tea turned into a 4-hour spiritual conversation that resulted in all 3 women accepting Christ as their savior. "Mrs. Trump, we've been searching for what you have," one of them confessed. "This peace, this purpose, this joy that radiates from you, we need Jesus in our lives." The ripple effects of these conversions would soon impact international relations in ways no one could have predicted. But perhaps the most powerful validation of Melania's calling came through the supernatural provision that began flowing toward her ministry. Christian philanthropists who had heard about the grace gatherings started offering substantial financial support without being asked. A believing tech entrepreneur donated a private jet for ministry travel. A Hollywood producer offered to create faith-based content specifically for influential women. God was orchestrating resources that would allow this ministry to reach the highest levels of global power. The partnership with Jonathan continued to deepen as he began accompanying Melania to select gatherings, sharing his insights about Christ's character and ministry approach. His presence brought additional credibility and spiritual authority to these exclusive events. Jonathan doesn't just play Jesus on screen, shared one grateful attendee. He embodies Christ's heart for hurting people in real life. Together, he and Melania create an atmosphere where the hardest hearts can be softened by God's love. Within 3 months, the Grace gatherings had quietly reached over 50 influential women across politics, entertainment, business, and international diplomacy. The ministry was operating completely under the radar of mainstream media, allowing for authentic spiritual transformation without the pressure of public scrutiny. Melania had found her true calling, and the results were exceeding every prayer she had cried out to God in her private chapel. But what happened next would absolutely shock the world as this quiet ministry suddenly exploded onto the global stage in the most unexpected way possible. Keep watching because you're about to discover how God used this faithful obedience to create a worldwide spiritual awakening. And don't forget to subscribe because this incredible story reaches heights you never imagined. 6 months after that tearful collapse in the Mar-a-Lago chapel, something absolutely extraordinary happened that would catapult Melania's quiet ministry onto the world stage in the most unexpected way. During a private grace gathering with 12 wives of G20 leaders, a live-streamed diplomatic event accidentally captured audio of these powerful women praying together and sharing testimonies of spiritual transformation. Within hours, the clip went viral worldwide, sparking global conversations about faith, power, and authentic spiritual awakening among the world's elite. The accidental exposure could have destroyed everything, but instead, it unleashed a supernatural movement that exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. Requests poured in from influential women on every continent, desperate to experience the same transformation they had witnessed. Melania found herself invited to speak at private gatherings in palaces, corporate boardrooms, and exclusive retreats from London to Tokyo to Sydney. What had begun as intimate dinner parties had evolved into a global ministry reaching the most powerful women on earth. Jonathan's role expanded as international media sought to understand this unprecedented spiritual phenomenon. His interviews about authentic faith and redemptive grace provided theological foundation for what people were witnessing. "What you're seeing isn't religious manipulation or political strategy," he explained to a BBC correspondent. "This is simply what happens when broken people encounter the love of Jesus Christ. Status and wealth can't heal the human heart, only God can do that." His gentle wisdom helped the world understand the spiritual authenticity behind the movement. The most shocking development came when 3 world leaders publicly credited their wives' spiritual transformations with positively influencing international peace negotiations. Conflicts that had seemed irresolvable suddenly found breakthrough through the prayers and changed hearts of women who had encountered Christ through Melania's ministry. "My wife's newfound faith has brought peace to our home and wisdom to our leadership," shared one head of state. "The grace she discovered is transforming how we approach diplomacy and service to our people." Looking back on that moment when Melania collapsed in tears after receiving God's message through Jonathan, both reflected on the incredible journey of obedience and faith. "I never imagined that my breakdown would become my breakthrough," Melania shared during a recent interview. "God used my deepest pain and greatest insecurities to create a ministry that's touching hearts I never could have reached through traditional methods." Her story had become a powerful testimony of how God transforms our wounds into our greatest witness. Jonathan's faithful friendship and spiritual partnership had proven essential to the ministry's success and authenticity. "God didn't call Melania to this work alone," he observed. "He orchestrated relationships and partnerships that would provide accountability, wisdom, and spiritual covering for such a significant calling. This is how the body of Christ is supposed to function, each person contributing their unique gifts for God's greater purposes." Their unlikely friendship had become a model for supernatural collaboration in kingdom work. The grace gatherings continued expanding globally, with Melania training other spiritually mature women to facilitate similar ministries in their own spheres of influence. The movement had sparked a worldwide awakening among elite women who had previously felt disconnected from authentic faith communities. Churches reported significant increases in attendance from wealthy and influential women seeking deeper spiritual truth after hearing testimonies from grace-gathering participants. But perhaps the most beautiful legacy of that tearful moment in the chapel was the demonstration that God's calling knows no boundaries of politics, wealth, or social status. Melania's willingness to surrender her carefully crafted public image for authentic spiritual purpose had given permission to countless other women to seek their true identity in Christ rather than worldly achievements. The ripple effects were still expanding across the globe, touching hearts in ways that would impact eternity. As you reflect on this remarkable story of divine revelation, supernatural friendship, and obedient faith, ask yourself these life-changing questions. What is God speaking to your heart about your own calling and purpose? Are you willing to let Him transform your past pain into a platform for His glory? And most importantly, are you listening for His voice in the unexpected relationships and divine appointments He's orchestrating in your own life? God is still revealing His heart to faithful people who will step out in courage when He calls. Maybe it's time for your own moment of tearful surrender to His perfect plans. If this incredible story of faith and transformation touched your heart, make sure to subscribe for more amazing testimonies of God's power in unexpected places, and share in the comments how God has used unlikely friendships or difficult moments to redirect your own life's purpose, because He's still working miracles today.